Mr Chairman, I'd like to reintroduce Michael Sanderson.
Hello again.
G'day, Board. Now for something completely different. 2.5 hours in. It's incredible. This goes to branch closures. I make the statement it's not possible to digitise a personal interaction, reflect it in a file, or do it remotely. Since the peak in 1975, Westpac has slashed 75% of non-metropolitan branches, leaving it with 194 from its original 777. Since the start of 2021, Westpac has closed 47 Westpac branches. These closures, from these closures, Westpac has left 13 towns with no banking services. They are Yankunytjatjara, Mannum, Tailem Bend, Kapunda, Peterborough, Hamilton Island, Jabiru, Terrigal, Leura, Tom Price, Wogan Hills, Cooperative and Kamnama. ANZ now has the smallest regional bank network in Australia, with just 179 of its original 615 branches outside the metropolitan cities still open, a cut of 71%. Branch closures are further complicated by the Suncorp deal, as reported in the Financial Review on the 13th. National Australia Bank has 286 regional branches still open, but has closed or cut services to a point where the facility is no longer classified as a bank branch to 474 locations. This is a cut of 62% of the original regional network of 760. My question is, do you claim that the branches Westpac has closed are unprofitable? If so, will you submit this claim to an independent audit? And how do Westpac branch closures comply with the mandatory and contractual warranty of the Banking Code of Practice that states, "We are committed to providing banking services which are inclusive of all people, including A, older people, B, people with disability, C, Indigenous Australians, including in remote locations, and D, people with limited English"?
Thank you. That's a question for the management. Thank you.
Yep. So, thank you, Mr Sanders. So, in relation to branches, yes, the numbers are going down, and as I said in my remarks up front, 7% of transactions are now handled through branches, and our approach there is that where we are closing a branch, there will be an Australia Post operation there, and so we will be working with Australia Post to lift the service in relation to those, and we will also be introducing more virtual capabilities. So we've got the digital capability on the phone and virtual bankers. In relation to your specific question on why, because we're seeing the foot traffic go down, we're also seeing the ability to staff them be difficult. A couple of the other things that we're doing is co-locating branches, so multiple brands being under one roof, and we're working towards Westpac branches being able to serve all brands as well.
But to my original point, if you withdraw a service and force people to go digital, they're going to have to go there. This doesn't answer the question of removing a physical bank. I look at my personal situation. I banked with NAB. I've never banked with Westpac, but I put my success down to my personal interaction with my banking manager. Without that, what happens is you deal with somebody remotely. Another situation was with the Bank of Queensland. I ended up dealing with a wet behind the ears bank Johnny, didn't know who I was, didn't know my business, never visited me, and he was making fundamental decisions from a distance. Now, on one hand, I've got NAB on one business supporting me because he knew me. On the other hand, I've got the Bank of Queensland with the wet behind the ears Bank Johnny that doesn't know me, that eventually sold my farm, despite never missing a payment. So, as I said, if you withdraw a service, people are forced to go down that track. You're suggesting that they're doing it voluntarily.
No, I'm suggesting that we're replacing the service with Australia Post when we talk about branches, and in relation to business bankers, a lot of our bankers are based in regional areas, and they get in the road, they get in their cars, and they get out and meet customers. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to service, but a lot of the transaction services are going online in the sense of moving money, paying money, receiving money, and changing details is actually being happening through the app now. That's where we see people going.
Where does a business in Cooper Pedy bank?
In Australia Post. There's still an Australia Post provides a service there to, I think it's 80 available banks.
So you wouldn't be impartial to Australia Post becoming a similar model to Kiwiland?
Well, that's their choice. They may or may not choose to go there, but we have an important 10-year relationship with Australia Post, which provides access to 3,500 points of presence through Australia.
Peter, do you want to pick up the branch?
So branches won't go to zero. We will always have branches. As I said before, it will be a blend of the branches we own and Australia Post. And we still have the second largest branch network in Australia. And so the challenge I think you're rightly pointing to is digital and the different cohorts of customers. So certainly, and this is, I apologise for generalisation, but a lot of customers don't go into branches. They tend to just use digital. There are a lot of people that prefer branches, and we've got to manage that well. But as I also said, every company I talk to is going digital, so we've got to get people into the digital economy as well. So branches won't go to zero. They will have a role. The role will change. It'll be less service transactions, cash, changing your details, more about advice, and there'll be a bigger role for video as well in the future.
Okay, yeah, please don't think that the Australia Post branches are a branch. I mean, it's sort of a Clayton's branch, isn't it?
It does service. Yeah, it does cash.
There's service and service.
So, I think the challenge we've always got here is the change in customer behaviour and trying to get the balance between viability, as you raised it, and making sure there's accessibility. We do operate today over 400 branches nationally, and I take your point. That's a significant reduction on where we were. But as Shane mentioned earlier, when we look at who comes to a branch, only 8% of ANZ customers regularly use a branch. So it is a real challenge for us, trying to get the right balance between the two. In terms of governance, it's the board's job to be accountable for making sure that we're making the right decisions and we're making them appropriately. So I think that's where you need to hold the accountability for any audit or any review, rather than us going externally. In terms of moving forward, we do a lot of work when we close a branch to make sure we are addressing access issues. In particular, there's a bias towards older Australians who prefer to use branch banking. And so we do reach out to people over 65, and we look to provide them with alternative ways in which they can bank with us and can transact. So for example, we changed our systems technology so that you could link a Visa debit card to a passbook and therefore be able to still transact. We did a very interesting survey recently, so I am not in any way diminishing the concerns and issues you raised, but people are embracing digital banking. We looked at over 50,000 customers, over 65, who had actually used a branch twice in the previous 6 months and who we then worked with as part of our transitions to move to digital. Over 90% of those customers had started to use digital banking, and a third of them had fully moved to digital banking. So that's the balance we're trying to navigate. We do absolutely understand our responsibility to the community and to the code of practice. And we're doing our best, Michael, to try and get the right balance on that.
I'm not sure I've been to many of the towns that you've just articulated, so
I'm quite sure you haven't.
although I've been to some weird and wonderful places this year, including as part of our board's trip to the Northern Territory, but we didn't come as far south as the Red Centre. But I did get into some pretty wild places, a couple of 3 hours out of Darwin. We have, even though our branches numbers have fallen over years, and that is the inevitable result of the changing pattern of usage, we still have 283 regional branches, which I think still puts us actually ahead of almost all our competitors. But more importantly, we have entered into the contractual arrangement with Australia Post to make sure that the post office branches are available to provide some banking activities and services to our customers. As you appreciate, it's never been possible. We've never been in every community as a bank, and the number of branches, I can only hazard a guess that the number of branches will continue to slowly decline over time as fewer and fewer people use them.
Yeah, I just got a follow-up on that. You mentioned Australia Post. Between 1991 and 1996, the Keating Labor government sold out working, indeed all Australians, by fully privatising the Commonwealth Bank. My questions are, would the NAB support the re-establish of a public-owned bank, perhaps through Australia Post, seeing it's doing all the heavy lifting, to offer all Australians bread and butter banking, irrespective of location and circumstance? And would NAB support the reintroduction of modern Glass-Steagall regulation that separates bread and butter banking from risky speculative banking?
So I'll answer the second part of that first, which is I don't know that we do any risky speculative banking, and therefore there's not much to ring-fence from that. And I don't think that the question of opening a government-owned bank has been raised in any other forum, so I've never turned my mind to it.
It's probably an indication of your detachment. It's been spoken about quite extensively in Parliament. I actually spent the last week of sittings in Parliament, and yeah, there's a lot of chatter. I'd suggest you start to engage a bit lower down, which goes back to my...
Thank you for that.
I'll answer the second one, that we are not in the Glass-Steagall issue, because on securities materially, we do issue debt securities, but we're not in equities, and we're not a big investment bank. And so, and I think that's the case for all the Australian banks. So I don't think a Glass-Steagall rule will achieve very much in Australia because the banks tend to be commercial banks. But Peter?
On the other point about a government bank, I think that's for the government. Well, we support it. We're doing everything we can to provide services around Australia. For us, what's happening is the economy is becoming digital and things are moving online, and we need to help position customers, not only for banking services, but all services to be online.
It was interesting, in New Zealand, Kiwi Bank was formed. If you to your other point, yes. So it was an interesting idea.
Thank you, Michael. Look, it's a hypothetical question, and I think we'd have to look at it on its merits if it arose. I'm aware of Kiwi Bank and of the work it does in New Zealand. We have a different set of circumstances in Australia, much bigger challenges, to your point, with population density. But look, we'll look at things on their merits when they arise. But thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you.